Welcome to our first Nepos Lightning Talk session. Our first speak is from Leland. Leland is our product owner and will explain us where we coming from. So looking forward to that, and over to you, Leland.
Hi everybody, so welcome to our first Nepos Lightning Talk. The concept is that we get to share something that we're interested in that is not particularly work related, but can enrich our minds with new information. And so I wanted to share with you some of the notes and lessons that I learned from reading Sapiens so far. It's a book that is quite popular. You can find it in every airport, bestseller for the last 3 years now. So let's get into it. Basically, the book focuses on 3 revolutions that happened in the history of humanity. We have the cognitive revolution, the agricultural revolution, and the scientific revolution. But today I will only talk about the cognitive revolution and the agricultural revolution because I'm only 75% through the book. But I think that it's got a lot of very interesting insights about these 2 periods of time. Basically, the revolutions have enabled humanity to do something that no other form of life have done. So humans are different than other species, and the book argues that these revolutions is what makes humans different, or what enabled humans to do things that no other species has ever done. And it relies centrally on this idea that humans can create and connect around myths and stories and ideas that don't physically exist. So unlike other animals, we are the ones who are able to talk to each other and bring up ideas into our mind that we can believe and thus cooperate and interact in ways that no other species can, and that is the central idea. So for example, religion, capitalism, politics, all of those concepts are really concepts that humans have been able to create because of their ability to tell stories. And through these shared myths, humans were able to basically take over the globe and put themselves at the top of the food chain. And also now we're at the period of time in our lives, or in the history of humanity, where possibly we can even overcome natural selection when we start to do genetic engineering and artificial intelligence that can be smarter than humans themselves. So all of that fundamentally comes down to storytelling. So, in a galaxy far, far away, there was a bang. Well, actually, there was no galaxy, but the bang helped form the galaxy. And that was 13 billion years ago. So very, very long time. And it took many, many billions of years, like approximately 9 billion years, before we first saw organisms on Earth, living organisms. So what I want to point out is that there was a lot of time before we even got to the point where we started to have organisms. But organisms continued to evolve and grow, and natural selection helped create and evolve until we got to the point where we have humans. And humans came along about 2.5 million years ago. So these were the first humans that evolved in Africa, and you can call him Archaic Man, the oldest man known to be. But then a lot more time passed in between, and we had the cognitive revolution, which happened 70,000 to 45,000 years ago, and that's when we were starting to be able to actually have these stories and beliefs and communicate with each other. We developed language. Then we had the agricultural revolution, which is when we started to grow food and not be nomadic. And then we have humans today. And then the future, we have no idea what will happen in the next 1,000 years. But what I want to point out here, and the reason why I did a timeline, is to kind of give you a sense of where we are today, which is point D, and how far away it is from where we came from, which is millions and millions of years of evolution and time and development, and how point E is really, really close in the timeline, but it's also completely unknown to us what could be potentially happening when you compare it to where we came from. And so I think part of especially why I was interested in this topic is to kind of understand that, especially as a company that we're a technology company and we're trying to build a future, there seems to be so much that humanity has. It's like we stood on the shoulders of others before us, but like not just those who created mathematics or those who helped build civilizations like the Greeks, but even archaic man who was hunting and gathering and trying to survive in the forest. Because actually, an interesting point is that when we first were humans and different species of humans, we were an insignificant species. We were in the middle of the food chain for millions of years, and we had no more impact on our environment than fireflies or jellyfish. So there was not really anything that separated us from all the other animals, besides we all were trying to survive. And in fact, there was many different types of species of humans, including the Homo sapiens that have emerged at one point or another. But eventually, Homo sapiens, who is not without guilt, we wiped out all the other species of humans too. Eventually, we were left with the Neanderthals, but what was interesting about us is that we were working closer together with each other, and the Neanderthals were stronger and bigger and had better weapons against us, is what's theorized, but we were able to work together to eliminate them. And one of the theories is that we eliminated them because they were so close to us but different enough. It was like the first form of racism in a way. Because we actually could interbreed with Neanderthals, and that some European descendants still have like 4% Neanderthal genes, but the majority of us are mostly Homo sapiens. So yeah, we were in the middle of the food chain, so we explored the world looking for food. We were moving, we weren't fixed in a single location. Our daily life was extremely varied. We were always like trying to do different things and watching our environment. And the author writes something very interesting, is that we were the most skilled humans in history at that point in time because all our senses were on high alert and it was necessary for survival. So in some ways, the humans of today are a little bit like less capable of the humans of that time period, because at that time period, their intellectual abilities were basically the same as now, but they also had to like really fight to survive. So they're constantly alert of their environment. The amount of information that they could process and that they were processing was so much higher. Nowadays, like we can focus on driving the car, but if something else is going on in the background, like a kid is screaming, we're like overwhelmed. But then they had to be continuously alert. Maybe they didn't have as intellectual abilities with language, but at least brain operating power, they were full force. And one of the interesting things that I also found out was that because we needed to move around more to find food, we were starting to form legs and upper body that was more narrow, and that allowed us to go further distances. This was the period that we basically went across the whole world, but that caused births to be more premature because with narrow hips, they couldn't hold the baby for the full pregnancy term. Like, for example, a horse or other animals, when they're born, they can instantly walk. But the baby, as Paul would know with his two twins, takes months before they're really able to take care of themselves or move. They're totally useless, which is unusual for most other animal species. So we developed this ability to move further for finding food, but at a cost of causing us to have births that are more premature, but that also coincided with the fact that humans became more social. And so this socialization within each other, because we had to support the babies, and you couldn't do it one mother or one family couldn't really always support all the children, so it was this communal group effort thing. So it kind of all coincided together that then this community and society helped create the cognitive revolution, because the cognitive revolution happened as is theorized as a way of gossiping, of having to talk with each other about what's going on, where's the lion, who's doing what in this community, and needing to have that communication between us because of us needing to have these premature births and us having to socialize together closer. Then there was this need of having to intellectually communicate with each other about what's going on because we were much more interactive. And so we developed bigger brains. Partly also, everything kind of happened at the same time. The ability to so in like one way, what I like to think about it is like when we come up with a new innovation today that like we're really, really impressed with, like, oh my God, now we can talk to the phone and it talks back to us and it's like kind of intelligent. Also, the humans of back then were being innovative too. They had to try to better work within their environment to support the children that they had, to support the food that they were looking for. And maybe they weren't sitting at startups and typing and coding and figuring out how to build a new program, but they learned how to use fire. And then fire, for example, allowed their their intestines to be smaller because they could cook the food, and then their brains became bigger. So this is a process of evolution and innovation that happened over a very, 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 very long period of time. But it did enable us to slowly gain more and more power that we wouldn't have had over the other species. And it's also at this point in time that we quickly rise up in the food chain from in the middle of the food chain to the top of the food chain, because suddenly the mammoths who were able to just destroy us like little toothpicks couldn't, we would corner them in a valley, and so then they wouldn't be able to escape. And then we would have like 50 humans able to just throw spears, and then they had food for a whole year. So suddenly this ability to tell stories and to work together allows the humans to work and hunt larger game, travel further, build devices to travel. And so, yeah, one of the things that's interesting is chimps can't form groups of more than 50, but humans can manage groups of 150 people. And they, like a corporation can't really like have departments that are bigger than 150 people, because then no one really knows what's going on. But I guess most corporations, that no one knows what's going on anyways. But yeah, we're really, what's special about us is that we can talk about these ideas and religions and beliefs and politics and economics, and that allows us to work together, and that allows us to have a greater group power, and that allows us also to accomplish more things together. One of the things that's interesting about this book is that the author really stresses that it's all make-believe in the end. When you have a corporation or a law, it's all something that somebody decided, and because everyone believes in it, it exists. But otherwise, if people didn't believe in it, it doesn't exist. And it's not a lie because everyone's involved in the process, but he also says that one person or one group can take the existing myth and start to change it and create a whole new different idea that then can be pushed onto the rest of the people who can then start following, which evolutionarily speaking was an advantage for humans that no other species had, because we could change without having to pass on genes. Other species, they can't change because they have no stories to tell each other to change their behavior. Their behavior only changes when they pass on genes. But we can change because we can change the story that we believe immediately, or pretty fast compared to other species. And it just keeps accelerating. But one of the things that's interesting is because we jumped so fast to the food chain, if you remember the timeline, we had millions of years that we were like in the middle of the food chain. We still feel anxious and stressed because we don't actually sense unconsciously or deeply within us, in our psyche, that we're at the top. We still have this fear of like having to worry about where we are and what our safety is. And so sometimes, you know, when we're interacting with each other, it can be kind of animalistic in that we almost feel like someone's attacking us, or we're trying to defend something. And that primal instinct that they talk about comes from the fact that we've not always been at the top of the food chain and we've not always felt secure. But the reality is the situation that we have in the society that we've constructed has created way more security and safety than maybe we've psychologically accepted for ourselves. And another thing too was that we like to think that like right now the problem is global warming from capitalism and like all the advancement that is destroying the earth. But even when we were hunter-gatherers and moving up the food chain, we were one of the most destructive species, because our ancient ancestors who went into Australia, when they first landed, they saw in Australia with giant mammoths and with giant sloths and all kinds of animal and fauna. But as soon as we entered the environment, because we had this super special ability of working together, we were able to hunt all the game that was big and completely change the environment in like the fastest amount of time that was ever seen for the Australian continent. Australia is a really good example because there was no humans there before we had developed the ability to be intelligent and communicate. As soon as we arrived, the whole continent changed. And that kind of also happened in South America as we moved down, and America. So yeah, it's a relatively new thing for us to be feeling at the top of the food chain, and we don't actually recognize it yet. So then the agricultural revolution happened, and this is an interesting thing because it also seems to have been caused by this collective storytelling, because we were fine and actually doing great, eating the food that we found naturally and moving around and exploring. There was no need for us to start to grow food, but it seems to be believed by the monuments found in the areas where people started to grow food that it was because of religion that we started to want to concentrate and build monuments, religious monuments, and like pyramids basically. And to do that, you had to concentrate a group of people in one area and feed them. And never before did we have to do that. And so it kind of, I mean, it's hard to point out what was the chicken or the egg, what constituted it, but it all kind of coincided together. And so by being able to grow food, we were able to feed more laborers in the same area, and we were able to worship our collective beliefs and support them. And then also the future became suddenly way more important for us, because it wasn't just about having to find food that day or for that week, but it was about having to make sure that the rain god came and delivered rain to the crops, and that the crops didn't have disease. And all of these things then caused us to further put our beliefs into something greater than just what is, because of the need to have the future under control. And the author argues that it was the greatest fraud because in a way it was like the species of wheat domesticated the humans, because the humans used to be free and used to go wherever they want and used to eat whatever they want and used to have a day full of many different activities. But since the agricultural revolution, the humans suffered from disease. They suffered from only living in one spot and not living a life of diversity. They suffered from malnutrition when the crops went bad and not having another alternative. They suffered from overcrowding and from a few select elite who were able to manage all of the land and force them to levy taxes. And so more people died of starvation and disease because of the agricultural revolution initially, and suffered on an individual level than before. But also, it was an evolutionary success because humans expanded exponentially. Before, we used to have only maybe 1 million human beings living on Earth, but after the agricultural revolution, our population size skyrocketed. And so we were able to feed and have more humans on Earth because of the agricultural revolution. On the individual level, there was more suffering. And so it was also something that was not noticed. It was just something that we did gradually over time. So the essence of the agricultural revolution: keep more people alive under worse conditions. But it also enabled us to get to where we are today. Also, the agricultural revolution also kind of triggered the advent of language and writing. Not language, but writing, because we never had a writing system until then. But in order to keep track of all the crops and whose crops were whose and how to trade the crops and the taxes for the crops, the Sumerians were the first to create any writing system, and their first writing system was designed to track crops. And from there, writing evolved into a greater practice. But for many thousands of years, or at least 1,000 years, writing was just dedicated to scribes who would collect the information for the kingdom to track how much food production and who owed whose food and whatnot. So that is kind of in the summary of the first part of the book, but it's talking about the cognitive revolution, where we gain the ability to speak with each other, to come up with common ideas, and then with these common ideas to start to believe in things, congregate together, plant plants so that we can all live together, and then focus on this lifestyle, this agricultural lifestyle, which then further, and I don't have so much time to talk about it, created the empire and the idea of the empire coming together with trade and now allowing different groups who had different resources to trade between each other. It also made it, the idea of the empire made common human culture, basically, because we used to have many, many tribes, but then now with the empire, all of these tribes said, oh no, I'm part of the Roman Empire, or I'm part of the Greek Empire, and they learned one language, and that also then led to the scientific revolution, which allowed us to realize that we can observe the world and then calculate from that observation and then create our own tools to then use the rules of nature to further allow us to produce more food, for example, or to live more comfortable lives because of the difficulties of the lifestyle that we created with this overpopulation. And then finally, the idea that, what will come next is this globalization, where we have one global empire where everyone is basically speaking the same languages or communicating easily and using the same monetary abilities. There might be still countries and differences, but we don't really know. And then there's what will come now and in the soon future, which is artificial intelligence exceeding human intelligence, possibility of immortality, genetic engineering, and maybe even a new species. Because the author argues that the Homo sapiens, who once destroyed all the other species, are now becoming a godlike species who can create new species, and whether that's good or bad, we don't know. So to conclude, these revolutions empowered humans to do something no other form of life has done, which is to create and connect around ideas that do not physically exist. And these ideas or shared myths enabled humans to take over the globe and put humankind on the verge of overcoming the forces of natural selection. But never forget that once we were apes running around the jungle scared of snakes. So that's the presentation. So many. And about the book, Sapiens, it's a very popular book that is still contested with some scientific communities or like experts in different. It's not like definitive truth. It seems to tell itself a story. The author has some opinions about things like, for example, happiness, that maybe our religious approaches haven't really brought us happiness, and he brings in like Buddhism as an example of one of the only religions that doesn't have a god, but still people are able to be happy. So he does have some opinions, and I just presented the thoughts that I found inspiring from the book. First, it was published in Hebrew because he's an Israeli author. Then it was translated to English in 2014. I think what makes this book really interesting is people have said that it created a new surge in interest in reading challenging nonfiction, because beforehand it was like not so popular to do that, but with this book it's like one of those books that you see in every airport, but it is a scientific book, and that's kind of a rare thing, that it helped bring back this popularism to like scientific research and finding answers and meanings in big questions like that through science. And Bill Gates says it's one of his top favorite books. Okay.
Cool. Very interesting. And you had this. You had a few bullet points of what the future will bring, like in the end a complete new species. And what is your opinion about it? Are you looking happy into this future or more afraid?
I'm curious, and I think it's interesting, and I think the reason why I wanted to research this and like understand more about it is because exactly that, like we are in this age where we're creating new technologies and we're trying to enable elderly to access technology and to participate in it, and so in some sense you want to gain a sense of trust and belief that this is a good direction to go in and that this is better for our species. But then I wanted to understand where did we come from and what is good for us based on like what we were able to accomplish and where are we headed, kind of getting a sense of anchor by looking at the past. And so my actual opinion is mixed. Like I feel more I don't know than I know. I do think that, like, for example, we've raised so many people out of poverty in the last years that it's incredible. Like the World Health Organization predicted like 10 years ago that it would be like in 30 years that we would still not have, we would have so many people starving of death because of population growth. But technology was able to move so fast forward that now we're able to feed way more people than we used to ever before. And so it's almost this counterbalance too, because when I read about how the agricultural revolution was a trick and like caused so much suffering in the end compared to how humans used to live before, you feel a little bit disappointed because then you're like, yeah, well, sometimes you might create technologies and new advances that aren't overall better for the world. But then you hear also that now we're helping 7 billion people on the planet live without having to worry about death from starvation. So I think it's a difficult thing to really put an opinion on, and I think the reality is we're a machine that is moving forward nonstop, and the best thing we can do is try to help guide it and participate in the process to make it better rather than worse, and there's no stopping it. So I want to understand more about how it works, and I think it's important to see where we came from to see how that works. And the idea of stories being really important, I think, makes a lot of sense. Like, and I think it's.
Or you come next week.
Yeah, that's why I was surprised that she said storytelling was her topic.
Cool. And do you read other books about the topic, or is this your first step?
This book was like my perfect first step into it, and on the side, I did a podcast on ancient Greece and how they formed, and like from the philosophical and anthropological perspective, like ancient Greece is like the 10 out of 10 in terms of a society that like helped found the rest of the future societies in terms of establishing politics, establishing theater and art and travel and transportation and economics and all kinds of things that they just blew everybody out of the water with how far they went in such a short time. Like in philosophy, like Plato and Aristotle, and like everyone, like a joke is that like all of philosophy is Plato's footnotes, because he did everything in like one lifetime and that everyone's still trying to figure out. So I think that's also an interesting area for me to start researching, is like ancient civilizations and what they contributed to current day civilizations, and what problems they had, which are the same exact problems we're having today. Like we look at Trump on the news and we're like, oh my God, we've never had this. But I just like listened to an ancient Rome podcast where like the same exact thing happened. Some tyrant came in, it was a battle for power, and like his followers and their followers, and it was all super divided, and conflict got nasty about a wall. So I think it's interesting that human society have always been facing the same problems, and we've always managed to overcome them, but sometimes we suffer through the process, and it's all about how the stories that we tell in order to move forward and to try to make it better for everyone. But also it's funny how easily we'll believe anything, so it's always been like that. And it's really hard to say what's right or wrong or what's good or better, but it's good to kind of see that it's always the same story.
Interesting.
Any thoughts that you guys, what did you think was the most interesting thing, or idea or concept?
I like the idea that, like you said at the beginning, that based on the ability to create the myth and ideas we evolved from the other species. And this is so true, and it's showing us how strong the humans are, and how, like you said, we are a machine that is going forward, and you just can't stop us. We can't say, oh, maybe we should think about this because maybe based on moral thoughts, this is not the best way to work on it, genetic engineering and so on. But you can't tell this person stop it. He won't stop. He will go in a closed room and do it. And
to the ocean, most likely in a boat, and then
it's just and it's a motivation in our mindset that we will never change, like you said. And this is really, I think this is important to think about this if we always getting into discussion and start to judge about other people and other people's mindset and so on, and they say that you are bad and I am better. It's like,
yeah.
And we all want to go the next step. And the best way is always the middle. And there we are going back to the philosophy and to the Greek philosophy, that the middle way is somehow the good way.
Yeah, I think the more and more I learn about this stuff, the more I have less opinions.
Yeah, I saw a scientific video which is discussing why we looking for a life outside of our universe and why we're looking on other planets for alien life, and if it would be a good sign for the humankind, because we're not finding life, and it could be, the theory is, it could be there is a filter. So other species in different worlds don't get to that point where they're intelligent or they build this agricultural stuff. So they just reach one point of their evolution, and then a filter comes and destroys the lives, like the dinosaurs, for example. And the question is, if we pass that filter, if our humankind just passed that filter and is living without destroying life, or if the filter is still to come and our intelligence or some other evolution will bring the end of the humankind. I think that's really interesting because this always going forward and finding new innovations and evolving even more and getting bigger and more people, if this brings someday maybe the end of the humankind or a new species, for example. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting theory.
Yeah, exactly, because the author argues that if there's any danger to the human species, it's ourselves, more than anything.
Yeah.
Because of for example, he quotes the Cold War, when we had all of the atomic bomb power to wipe everything off the face of the earth. Yeah. And now we reduced the amount of atomic bomb power on the overall than before, but we got to the point where these stories that we're telling ourselves are also exactly what's fueling us to destroy each other. And at what point, and I think that's why he also tries to bring Buddhism and some sort of questioning about looking into these stories and beliefs that we tell us and see, is it always the answer for more, right? Or can we find a new story that maybe we can be satisfied with what we have or where we are? And I think I think if there is something that I'm curious about for the future, is this idea of the awakening of the human psyche, where like I said, we have this psyche that still believes that it's in this primal state, and we think that we're super intelligent right now, and we look back on like archaic humans as being dumb, but in some ways, like there's a lot to learn from where we came from, psychologically speaking, where they were just, you know, hunting and gathering and chill with life. And maybe that is part of what the next 1,000 years will show, is that humans will start to kind of see things differently, and I think maybe reconnect with where they came from and kind of find a new psychological balance with their environment, so that maybe that's the only solution, so that we don't have that filter on ourselves. But that's kind of what I'm curious about or more interested in. Any other thoughts?
I like the thinking that because what we're doing feels so new, and whenever we do something we think, okay, we're really on top of everything, and we reinvent something so important and so new. And if you take a look into the history and find out that the Greeks, for example, all thoughts we have were already thought, and they have huge books and theories about it, and there is already a lot of brain power into that thinkings. I really like it that we still have the feeling it's new, and we are always continuing, right? We're not stopping. Nobody, or the majority of the people, would not say, okay, everything is done already, I will not do something new. But as humans, we are always trying to do it again, and even though compared, if you would know everything and it's compared to everything, it's just a tiny bit of change. But for us, it feels completely new and brings us forward and makes us also happy with new input and new ideas we are bringing to life.
Yeah, I think that's exactly maybe part of what the machine of humanity is that we're always curious, and we're always, no matter what, are going to push the limits of knowledge and push the limits. But maybe it was the same problem in a different level, and when you look back and you read about it, that you're thinking like, wow, they have the same thoughts, same problems, but the people who are pushing the frontier don't care about that.
Yeah. And I really like the idea that the people in the past, Neanderthalers, if they're sitting in the startup cave, and all the young people came out and say, hey, grandpa, look at, no, grandpa maybe not, but hey, father, look at this, I built a new tool. And they say, I don't need your tool, I did it with my stone for the whole time of my life, and whatever you do is shit. No one will need it. Yeah. But this is the future. Fire! Oh no, I don't need it.
Right.
I have clothes that makes me warm. Why do you need fire? It's too dangerous.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that impressed me was the way the author wrote about the human species going across the Bering Strait in Russia to Alaska and moving down. We moved so fast for a human species to go from the freezing of from the cooling down of the ice age all the way down to the bottom of South America. Like, it was just it was 16,000 years that took from going to the top down to the bottom, and we were going by foot. So like every 1,000 years we're covering a ton of space, going through desert, going through jungle, going through everything. Mm-hmm. So he was saying that's really impressive how the human species just expanded into that territory and adapted into new cultures that survived within the jungle territory and found new predators and food and managed all of these different ecosystems. On one hand, it's destructive in some way, but on the other hand, it's impressive to see how there was no story of any species that was able to move that fast and that capable. So, yeah, we're not the first ones out here coming up with new things and doing impressive stuff. And I think it's important to remember that maybe it's in our DNA more than we realize.
Okay, so thank you very much for the talk and the preparation. That's very interesting. Looking forward to our topic next week.
A pleasure to talk to you guys.
Cool.